Shalom, this is Shira Sherbow, and I want to welcome you all the way from Sfat, Israel. Welcome to our Tour for the Nations Women's Online Gathering. So many cool things to talk to you tonight about because, for one, last week we ended with a question, and so I want to cover that question, and then I want to tell you some things that happened this week and tell you some things that are coming up. And so this one might go kind of long, I don't know. But it's good. We titled it 4 Words That Changed History. So I have to kind of lead up to that. I'll do that at the end, but it's very exciting. It's so funny because even though we're going to talk about something that we ended with last week, we're going to talk about something that's been happening the last few days and something that's going to happen. It all kind of came together like when you're making a soup and it's a little of this and a little of that, but I think it's going to be delicious. So hang on, there's a lot of good stuff. Okay, so last week Angela gave a question of how do we give a rebuke, because we ended with the story of Jacob and his 12 sons, and one of his sons, Reuben, did something very impulsive, and it said Jacob heard about it, and then there's this long pause, there's this long space in the Torah, and the next thing it says is, and Jacob's sons were 12. So we were talking about how every dot, every comma, every space has meaning. And so what happens after they tell this story of Reuben did something very kind of passionately, he acted passionately, impulsively to protect his mother's honor. But what he didn't do was really protect his father's honor. So it was an impulsive act, and Jacob heard about it, and then this long space, which we tell by this space that this is Jacob's pause. As a parent, sometimes when our children do things, we have to decide whether this is something that we say something about or that we bite our tongue. And it shows that Jacob decided to bite his tongue. That's what we learn from this space. So then the question was, okay, so how do we give a rebuke? And it's a very touchy situation. I was reading about Marie Osmond when she lost her 50 pounds. And people were asking her, how did you lose 50 pounds? And she told this story. She told how her mother was dying. She was very close to her mother. And her mother, before her mother died, her mother said, Marie, you really need to lose the weight. And Marie took this to heart because, it's your mother and she's dying and it's the last thing that she says to you. And she's doing it out of love, and she's telling you this is something, for you. She's concerned about you. And so Marie Osmond, obviously she lost the weight. We see how good she looks now. And so there's something about giving a rebuke when a person's on their deathbed. It's easier for the other person to take it without being offended. And I know, Angela, you told me the story of when your mother, before she passed away, she told you, Angela, it's the Jews. Check out the Jews. The Jews know God. I believe it was something like that. And you took that to heart because there really is such a sincerity. The person is never going to see you again, and they want to leave you with one word of wisdom. And so it's 1/5 of our Torah, the whole book of Deuteronomy, is a deathbed rebuke, because we know in Deuteronomy Moses is going to be passing away soon. And so the whole book of Deuteronomy, he's rebuking the people. He's kind of going over everything that's happened the 40 years. But it's because he is about to die, and he's passing the leadership to Joshua. The people are able to handle his rebuke. So there really is something about a sincerity and people talking to you and telling you what they want to say. We know, though, that Jacob, he did confront Reuben on his deathbed. He didn't say anything at the time, but at the time he was worried that Reuben would leave and join his uncle Esau. And so he just was quiet. And when he was dying, he was like, I'm not worried about you leaving me. I'm leaving you. So he said what he had to say then. So I wanted to read you something that happened with Noah and his 3 sons. Noah did something embarrassing, and one of his sons handled it very poorly, and the other 2 handled it well. So I'll read you the story, and then I'll tell you what the commentaries say. That Noah had become drunk, and he was laying uncovered in the tent. And so his grandson Canaan told his father Ham what had happened, and and Ham, the father of Canaan, looked at his father's nakedness and assaulted him, and he publicly related the incident to the 2 brothers. Okay, and then the other two brothers, Shem and Japheth, they took a garment and placed it on both of their shoulders, and they walked backwards and covered their father's nakedness. So what it says, obviously what Ham done, the way Ham handled it was totally wrong. He says, when a person sees another stumble in an inappropriate act, there's 2 possible reactions. One is to be disgusted by the act, and B, one thinks, what can I do to help this person? So Ham took the former approach. He looked at his father's nakedness. He focused on the inappropriateness of the situation, but Shem and Japheth, on the other hand, they did not see their father's nakedness. They did not become disgusted at what had occurred. They simply took action to correct the situation. So this gives us a lot of insight. When somebody needs to be corrected, one of the things you're not supposed to do is publicly embarrass them, and you come at it from a position of loving them and covering their nakedness, so to speak. So, and I'm going to come back to this because this story of Noah and Shem and Japheth leads us into the Hanukkah story. But I wanted to tell you something that happened this week in my home when it comes to rebuke. There's, I joined this the Jewish family. I wasn't raised Jewish, but I married my husband who's Jewish, and I converted to Judaism, and I live in a Jewish neighborhood. And so there's been a lot of things for me to learn. And one of the things that doesn't come easy for me, it's not my strong suit, but is details about books. If you're ever in a Jewish community, you should be aware that there's lots of rules about, like you're not supposed to just lay a book, face down. There's rules about how to stack books. You never can take a book with you, like if you're out and you have your prayer book, you can't go into the restroom unless your book is in a bag or in a purse. You can't just carry a holy book into the restroom. Okay, so my husband has been telling me for a while now that I'm not doing this right. He comes kind of behind me, and he sees that I've left. You can't leave a book on the couch where you've been sitting, a holy book, and so it's in a very loving way. He's been trying to tell me that I don't handle the books correctly and follow all the rules. And so finally it came up again this week, and I feel like I finally heard him. How a couple of things have to happen when the person's giving the rebuke, and then the other person has to be ready to hear. And I don't think I've ever really been ready to hear. I feel like maybe I changed 20%, like I became a little bit aware, but overall it went in one ear and out the other. And so what he's been doing all this time is just kind of going behind me and fixing the situation. Whenever he sees that I would do something wrong with one of the books, he didn't say anything after a while, he just fixed it. But I heard him this week tell me, he said, I just don't want you to be embarrassed. Like if somebody comes to the house and you've done something, like you have the books laying around in the way that's not supposed to be, I don't want my wife to look bad. And so I received what he had to say, and I heard the rebuke, and I know it was done in love, and I know he did it in a way for my best interest. So that's the way a rebuke is supposed to go. Like when we rebuke our children, we're supposed to just say it in a way like Marie Osmond's mother, like, I want you to be your best self. I want you to be everything you can be. This is holding you back. It's kind of, you're doing it for them, and you're doing it out of love, and you do it in a way that they can hear you. And one of the best, I read a lot of things this week and listened to a lot of things about giving rebuke, but one of the best stories I heard was there was a teacher that in the first day of school, she had all of the kids' names on the board, and next to each child's name, she put an A. And she said, this is your grade. And this is the grade that I want you all to have at the end of the year. And I'm going to work with you, and you all have the potential to get an A, and I'm going to work hand in hand with you. If you're ever falling short, I'm going to show you what to do for makeup and to do everything possible that you end up with an A. And at the end of the year, every single kid ended up with an A. So they saw the teacher as coming to them, like wanting the best for them, wanting to be there to help, and wanting them to just reach their full potential. So maybe that helps a little bit with this idea of how to give rebuke, but you never, ever, ever want to just publicly embarrass people. Okay, so it's really interesting how this leads us into talking about Hanukkah, which is coming up. It actually starts tomorrow night on Sunday night. So Noah said to his two sons that treated him respectfully, he said that Shem was younger, but he told Shem that he was actually going to be the spiritual leader. Shem was the one that decided to become a teacher. So Shem was like what you would call a servant leader. He got that role, and so him, when we say Shem, we don't just mean Shem. We mean Shem and Shem's descendants, like his descendants through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Jewish people. They would be in charge of being the servant leaders of the world. What they would be doing is teaching the world about God and how to civilize the world. When God first made people, they weren't acting much different than animals. And so they had to be taught. And so Shem and his family would be in charge of teaching the world how to act like human beings. And it just reminds me when I would go and be around my grandkids. You get little 2-year-olds, and you're teaching them, no, we don't run in the house. That's what the animals do. I remember my grandson, we got ready to eat, and he said to one of the other kids, you need to wash your hands, we're human beings, not animals. And so the kids were learning in a little childlike way how to be civilized, how to act like human beings, how we're different from the animals. We go to the bathroom, we come out, we wash our hands. We do everything like little human beings. Well, when you get to the Hanukkah story, you have Shem's kids and Japheth's kids, Noah's two sons. Japheth is going to turn, his descendants are going to be the Greeks. And he says that the Greeks are just going to spread out. And that's exactly what happened over time. Noah was prophetic. And so he said that we should learn about God in the tents of Shem. And I wanted to have this little tent look back here again tonight because we're talking about the tents of Shem. And so that's the job of Shem's descendants, to teach the world about God. And so Japheth's descendants were the Greeks. And Noah said that the Greeks would just spread out over the world. And they have. They just affected the whole Western Hemisphere, and the Greek culture is still with us today. The Greeks brought so many cool things to the world. They brought the Olympics, mathematics, science, theater, the alphabet. Okay, so when we fast forward in time from Noah's two sons getting these prophecies, we have the Hanukkah story. We have the Jewish culture and the Greek culture. And of course the Greeks have the numbers, the Greeks have the power, the Greeks are the Jews have been around and they're a little old-fashioned, and the Greeks come out on the scene and they're the up-and-coming, latest, greatest world superpower. And so when I was trying to teach my grandkids about the story of Hanukkah, I told them in G-rated language what kind of the clash was, that the Jewish women had a lot of privacy, okay? And the Greeks didn't think that the Jewish women needed their privacy. So this caused some problems, okay? And so there was also other things that the Jews did that bothered the Greeks. Like the Jews had oil and they had holy oil. And the Jews and the Greeks were very logical, and they said oil is oil. So what makes this oil, it tastes the same, it smells the same, it has the same consistency. Why are you saying this is holy oil and this is regular oil? And then the Jewish people would have a holy day and regular days. The holy day would be the seventh day, and the Greeks, that would drive them crazy because they were so logical, and they said, no, every day is the same. You don't have a holy day, you don't have holy oil, you don't have holy lamps. And so this was the clash between the two cultures, because the Jewish people would say things like, but this is what God said, this is what God told us. And the Greeks didn't go that there was one almighty God who told us what to do. This clashed with the Greek culture. So we just got an email this past week that we're supposed to eat cheese during Hanukkah. And so I read the story of why we eat cheese during Hanukkah. And I think you're going to love this story, because we always hear the story about the Maccabees, the Jewish Maccabees, the Maccabee brothers. So I read the story about the sister of the Maccabees. And her name was Yehudis, and she wasn't getting her privacy from the Greek general. So she was a Jewish woman. So what she did, she got a plan that she would pretend that she wanted to join forces with the Greeks. And so she pretended to be friendly with the Greek general, this Greek general who wasn't giving her privacy. Trying to keep a G rating here, but I'm about to lose it, because so she pretended to be friendly with him, and she fed him some very salty cheese, and then she fed him a lot of strong wine. And so he fell asleep, and when he fell asleep, she took his sword, she chopped off his head. She collected herself, she got the head, she put it under her cloak, covered, up his body in the bed like he was sleeping so nobody would know. She left with the head, the general's head, and she went to her brothers, and she said, and she showed them the Greek head of the general. And so her brothers were like, okay, looks like we're at war. And they went in and stormed the palace, and when the Greeks found out that their general was dead, it caused a lot of panic, and they got, they went to war. But the Jews were so outnumbered, because there's this thing called infighting, because a lot of the Jews, it wasn't like all of us are joined together to fight against the Greeks. It was like they were fighting amongst themselves, because many Jews thought the Greeks were it was way cooler to be a Greek than it was to be Jewish. And so they had the infighting of their own family saying, I think maybe I want to be a Hellenist. And a Hellenist was a Jew that took on the Greek culture instead of the Jewish culture. So this idea of, hey honey, somebody's at the door. Honey, sorry. Um, so somebody's at the door. Um, so instead of like learning in the tents of Shem, like Noah had said that God would be in the tents of Shem, it was the other way around, and the Greek culture was taking over. So I heard a funny story how this woman took her daughters to see Disney on Ice, and there was this theme of the Disney princesses, whether it was Little Mermaid or Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty. It was always like the princess was like the damsel in distress, waiting for her prince to come. And she went home and she asked her husband, who was a rabbi, like, what is this deal with the women being like waiting for their prince to come? Is this idea, do you learn this in the tents of Shem? Do you learn this from the Jews? And he said, no, they didn't get that from us, because in the Jewish stories, many times the women are like this Yehudas who chopped off the head of the Greek general, and she ignited the war, and her brothers. So you see a partnership with the men and the women. The women aren't victims in the Jewish stories. We have the story of Queen Esther, and of course Queen Esther was able to take down the two most powerful men in the world at that time. Her husband was the king and Haman, and she used a lot of psychology to get the king to come against Haman, and she changed the whole decree for her people. And so there's another Jewish woman named Yael, who put a tent peg through, the enemy had come to her tent. She did the same thing. She got him drunk, and when he was asleep, she put a tent peg through his head. So this is the Jewish stories of the Jewish woman. We don't have damsels in distress. We have, the heroines and the unsung heroes, really, of the story. And so these, the word Hanukkah comes from the word Chinook, I think is what it is, but that means education. So one of the things that's going on at Hanukkah time is coming straight down from Noah. Noah said that as long as Japheth, he was going to, his descendants were going to be the Greeks, and they were going to bring a lot of good things into the world, but they needed to learn about God in the tents of Shem. And so this is the thing that at Hanukkah time, it's with all the candles that we light, with our holy oil and our holy lamp, doing things because God said so. This is the message to the world that we need to learn about God in the tents of Shem. You need to learn the Jewish worldview. These are the people that have been put in charge to be the light to the world, the light to the nations, and teach the world about God, teach the world how to be civilized and how not to act like animals, how the women should be treated, how the women should have privacy. This is something that the Jewish people brought to the world. And so this is one of the main messages of Hanukkah, to just receive this education in the tents of Shem. Okay, so I'm getting to the 4 words that change the world. It's coming. This idea of infighting within the family, it started, Jacob had his 12 sons, and there's the 12 brothers, and there's this, 10 of the brothers really felt like Joseph wanted to kill them, and there's a halacha that if you think that someone is going to kill you, you can get up early in the morning and kill them before they kill you. So this was going on with the brothers. There was this open hatred with Joseph, and they really thought that Joseph had it in for them, and that Joseph wanted them dead, and they thought that we have to get rid of him before he gets rid of us. And it's this infighting in Jacob's family, and they end up kidnapping Joseph basically and selling him as a slave. So Joseph ends up as a slave in Egypt, and he's working for this man Potiphar, and this whole situation takes place. He's an 18-year-old, very good looking, and his master's wife, she wants him. She shows him that in the stars, she really believes that she is supposed to have Joseph's child. And she gets it mixed up because it's really her daughter in the future that is going to have Joseph's child. This is all in our oral Torah, the Midrash. And but she relentlessly just throws herself at Joseph, and in the end she ends up very angry because what he does to resist her. I was reading that it's so unnatural that an 18-year-old guy away from home and this beautiful woman throwing herself at him, trying to have his child, and he resists her to the point where she becomes so angry that she falsely accuses him of rape, and Joseph ends up in prison. Okay, so it's at this time that Joseph is sitting in prison, falsely accused of rape. I mean, it can't really get much worse than that. And I was reading that it was so unnatural for him to resist her that it is as unnatural as the parting of the Red Sea. But he does it. He comes against everything natural and he resists this woman. So he's in prison on false charges, and it so happens that two men that work for Pharaoh, the butcher and the baker, they get thrown into jail. Now, here come the 4 words. Ready? So, Joseph, you would think he has his own problems. He's falsely accused of rape. First, he's sold by his brothers. His mother died when he was young. I mean, he hasn't seen his father in years. And he's sitting there, now he's rotting away in prison. So what does he care about these 2 guys that work for Pharaoh that got thrown into prison? But he says to them, he sees them and they're despondent. And he says to them, I'm just going to read it to you. It's in, you'll find these 4 words in Genesis. I think it's Genesis chapter 40, verse 6. The 4 words are, why the long faces? Why the long faces? He notices, okay, he's not consumed with his own problems and everything that's going on with him. And he sees that these 2 men are upset. And he strikes up a conversation with them and becomes friendly with them. He could be saying, tell me about it, or I care about you, or maybe I can help. But it's all pretty much the same thing. In Hebrew, it comes out, why the long faces? So here's how it goes. He says, Joseph came to them in the morning. He saw them, and look, they were depressed. So he asked the officers of Pharaoh who were with him in custody in the master's house, saying, why do your faces look so down today? This is in Hebrew, why the long faces? And they said to him, we've had a dream, but there's no one to interpret it. Okay. This conversation eventually leads to the next thing, leads to the next thing, leads to the next thing that saves the world. The whole Middle East was destined to starve, to die in a famine. That would include Egypt, and that would include Joseph's whole family. But instead, Joseph doesn't wallow in self-pity. He doesn't just mind his own business. It's not always best to mind your own business. He just sees them. They're depressed and they're bothered, and he's in the midst of all his own stuff that he's dealing with. He says, why the long faces? And so they tell him about the dream, and he interprets the dream, and then this leads to one of them later, a couple years later, remembering that Joseph can interpret dreams. And so we see that Pharaoh has this dream, and God is trying to talk to Pharaoh in the dream, but Pharaoh doesn't get it. And Pharaoh asks all the wise men to come interpret his dream. And then this friend that Joseph made in prison by just asking him why the long faces, and they strike up this conversation, and Joseph interprets his dream. So this friend, he says to Pharaoh, I made this friend in prison, this slave, and he actually interpreted our dreams, and everything he said came true. And maybe Pharaoh, maybe you would like to have this slave come before you. It's worth a try to see if he can interpret your dreams. So in one day, Joseph goes from the prison to the palace. He has to shave, take a shower, get some nice clothes on, and stand before Pharaoh. And all because he took the time to talk to these people in the prison, try to help them, and it turns out that he's able to interpret Pharaoh's dreams, and he keeps telling them, I'm not interpreting your dreams. It's my God in heaven that is using me to interpret your dreams, to warn you that there's a famine coming. There's going to be 7 years of plenty, and then there's going to be 7 years of famine. And if you don't prepare for the famine during the 7 years of plenty, the whole world is going to starve. And so Pharaoh is seeing the seriousness of his dreams and how he needs Joseph. There's nobody else in the kingdom that is hearing from this God that knows these things. And so Joseph convinces Pharaoh to put him in charge. He's like the food czar, and Joseph is able to save all of Egypt and even save his whole family, because everyone in the Middle East was affected by the famine when it hit. So these 4 words, why the long faces, which basically was Joseph just being concerned about someone else. And so this is the Torah portion, or one of the Torah portions that's always read during Hanukkah. And it has a message for us about learning in the tents of Shem, getting a Jewish education, and being able to come out of ourselves even when things are not looking like the way we want to, the way that Joseph did. And he was able to have this simple conversation. And have you heard of the saying, there's no small potatoes, there's no small fries, there's no insignificant events. Sometimes giving someone just a sparkle in your eye, just a smile, just a kind word can do so much. And so Joseph just took the time. He saw some people that looked depressed. He asked them about it. He was able to help them, and it was the catalyst that just started the whole chain of events. Otherwise, he could have minded his own business. He could have rotted away in prison, and the whole world could have starved. Because, you know what I mean? But it was just that one thing led to the next, led to the next, led to the next. So there's no small potatoes. During Hanukkah, we make potato latkes. And so I just wanted to give you a little visual aid, just to know that every little thing you do matters. Every smile, every kind look in your eye that you give someone, every time you take every time you take the time to ask someone how they're doing and to reach out and to help, those are not small potatoes. So if you're going to make some potato latkes and fry them in oil, this is what we do, because everything's about the oil during Hanukkah. Just remember, there's no small potatoes. Everything is important. Everything is from God, and you never know what one little thing that you do or say to someone, how it's going to lead, and it could change your destiny, and it could change the destiny of the whole world. All right, I want to wish you a very joyful, happy Hanukkah, and have a great week, and teach your daughters about the Jewish women, how they are strong, how they are partners with the men, and We're not just damsels in distress. So anyway, feel free to ask me any questions that you have about anything going on in the Torah portion. And just, the greatest thing we can do is, the whole reason for the Torah is that we can bring a little bit of joy to other people. So focus on that. Don't focus on your own problems. Come out of yourself. There's no small potatoes. Just bring joy, bring a smile, bring a kind word to everybody that you meet. Happy Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah from Israel. Shalom. See you next time.